Rhodri's back with me. It's great to welcome Rhodri, and I've asked Rhodri just to share with us about one of the spiritual giants of Welsh history, and that is Ann Griffiths. But can I just reassure people, this is not so much a history lesson, though obviously there's some history involved in this because we're looking at a historical figure. But this is hearing about a spiritual giant in Welsh church history, and to see what we can learn today, to bring this person into the today, so we can learn as individuals from the life of Ann Griffiths and as a church as well. So, Rhodri, thank you for taking the time.
Because thank you.
Yeah, as a pastor up in Bangor. I think you're kept pretty busy, really, aren't you? And obviously with a family as well. But yeah, so thank you. For those who don't know you, Rhodri, very brief introduction, and then we'll get you to share a little bit about Ann Griffiths. Is that okay? Very brief.
Thanks, Gwyneth. Thanks for having me on. I'm Rhodri. I'm the pastor up in Bangor, Capel of Ffynnon, the Welsh Evangelical Church in Bangor, Gwynedd. And I'm also the coordinator of the Daniel Rowland Network, which is doing Welsh language theology training out of Union School of Theology.
That's great. Very brief and very concise. People know who you are now. Okay. It's Ann Griffiths that is under the spotlight today. Okay. Now, to many Welsh-speaking Christians in Wales, Ann Griffiths is a name that's familiar, but it's not familiar to everybody. Okay. So just give us a little bit of a history to start with of Ann Griffiths. Would you, Rhodri?
I will. Well, we say Ann Griffiths, that's the name that we know her as, but of course, during most of her life, she would have been known as Ann Thomas. That's the name she was given when she was born. She married about a year before she died. She married a Mr. Griffiths, so then history has known her as Ann Griffiths. But
wow, okay.
In her local community, she would be known as Ann Thomas or even Nancy Thomas Dolwar Fach. She was born 250 years ago today, not today, this year, in 1776. And she lived her short life. She died when she was 29. She lived her short life in the same community where her parents were raised, in we'd say North Powys today, Montgomeryshire. And she lived, married, died in that small local area of North Montgomeryshire.
Dolwar
Fach was the name of her farm. So she was raised on a farm in that part of Wales, and she died in 1805.
1805.
A few weeks after she'd given birth, and her daughter sadly died as well.
Oh, okay.
So quite a tragic story, actually.
Yeah.
From a human perspective, a short life, a tragic story. But when we come into her spiritual legacy, a wonderful story.
Geographically now, okay, just to put this in a geographical context, what's the nearest sort of big town to Dolwar Fach, would you say? I'm putting you on the spot, but
yes, you are. I'm guessing the biggest local towns would have been Welshpool or Oswestry.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was that area. Yeah.
Yeah, they'd be around, I don't know, 15, 20 miles away.
Okay, so quite close, I'd say, to the English border, really, then, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get on to her legacy in a minute, but explain a little bit about what Wales was like during that time, would you? 1805, she was born, or did she?
She died in 1805. She was born in 1776, so that's why we're celebrating 250 years of her birth this year. Okay.
So what was Wales like?
This is the time just before kind of the Industrial Revolution took hold in Wales.
Right.
So we're thinking about the time before the railways, before the expansion of the industries that Wales became known as. So you're thinking probably before the times of coal mines and the slate quarries in North Wales. So for Anne's life, it would mostly be a very rural area in that part of Wales, where it would be nearly all Welsh speaking, and you'd have families living in the same area generation after generation. And I guess Anne's own family life would testify to that. She was christened, married, buried in the same church, exactly the same as her parents. That happened to her parents. So they lived in a very in close-knit communities where you'd have generations of the same family living in the same area, really.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to appreciate the environment, the community of that time, really, because what we're used to is today, where you can travel freely and change churches freely, and because there's but in her time, obviously, it was very, very different. What was she like as a person? How can we know that?
Well, we can, because there are some records, some biographies of her life from people who knew her.
Yeah.
And one of probably the most important things to say about her would have been that she was struggling with ill health most of her life.
Okay.
So she was described as being rather frail, and that she struggled with that throughout her life. But even though she struggled with that, she was quite strong in mind, character. We've got a picture of her as a young woman who was full of life, could be witty, mischievous, and impulsive, but she was certainly cheerful and was gifted being able to write poetry. And she obviously had an exceptional memory, as we can see from some of the things that she composed, and her use of biblical references in what we now know as her hymns. She had very little formal education, but she used the gifts that she had to glorify God. And that's why we still remember her now, 250 years after she was born. And even in Welsh language churches, we still use her compositions as we worship it through the Welsh language.
And what's remarkable as well, Rhodri, and you will relate to this, and I will relate to this as a first language Welsh speaker, that her compositions, her hymns, still move you even today.
Yeah,
they move you in here, because of the composition and the spiritual richness of the words. So, yeah, and I think that you can only appreciate the depth of these hymns probably as a first language Welsh speaker. I don't know. That's maybe for another day.
Well, I think most of her works have been translated, but I think, as in any kind of poetry, you do lose something in translation. There's a richness and there's a lucidity of thoughts in her poetry that's remarkable in Welsh, and you get a sense of that, I guess, in translation. But
yeah. I think the best expression that I've heard to explain what we're talking about here with regard to the richness of the words in the Welsh language is that words are carriers of culture. Yeah, not just carriers of information.
Yeah,
they're carriers of culture as well. When it comes from a heart whose identity is first language Welsh, and she puts that into writings, the culture of that comes out, as well as the spiritual aspect, obviously, of it as well. So, yeah.
And she would have been raised in a culture of poetry, of singing carols and composition. Okay. Yeah. So what she did when she was converted to Christ, she used what she knew and had been raised in, and used that to the glory of God in her compositions. And that's a wonderful marriage of where she was raised and the culture that she was brought up in, and how the Spirit of God moved her to be able to use what she already had in God's plan to be able to glorify Jesus himself.
Was she converted at a young age? Is there any way of knowing that?
Well, she died in a young age. So, yeah. She died when she was 29, and she was converted around between 20 and 21 years of age.
Okay, wow, okay.
she would have been raised in the Anglican Church, in the established church, as nearly everyone would have been members of that church at that time. I think her father was a church warden in Llanfihangel and Wynfa, at the local church. So she would have been going to church regularly. She would be well aware of the Bible and of the Common Book of Common Prayer. But when she was 20 or 21, she was converted after listening to a preacher. And then during that time of conversion, she joined the local Calvinistic Methodist Sayat, or the Society, which was such a vital part of the growth of Calvinistic Methodism in Wales. So she joined the Sayat, but interestingly, some of her immediate family were part of that Sayat as well. So you could see a wider work of God being saving people and working in her immediate area, because her father and her brother joined the local Methodist Sayat as well. And it's there where she was formed as a Christian, there where she was able to share her very intense feelings and experiences of God being at work. Firstly, those intense experiences were of being aware of her fallen, sinful state, and then the wonderful comfort of knowing that Jesus was her saviour, and that his atonement was for her, and that she lived a life of thankfulness to God because of the wonderful way of salvation prepared in eternity, and that she was called to be a part of God's church. And her work encapsulates a lot of that in the way that she processes what she had been reading, or what she heard in the Sayats, or even what she heard through Methodist preachers who would have visited, or secondhand, how she processed what she heard from others in the Sayat who'd heard preachers during that time.
Amazing. I'll tell you what struck me with you sharing that, she was converted at the age of 21. Okay. So her ministry, if you like, wasn't regarded as a ministry as such, I don't think, at that time, but her ministry, her active hymn writing, was only 8 years, 21, until she, So remarkable legacy that she has left with 8 years of ministry, if you know what I mean, 8 years of writing, which really gives hope for all of us, doesn't it?
And the thing with Ann Griffiths is she wouldn't have thought that she had a ministry.
No.
So what she did, it wasn't that she sat down and said, right, I'm going to write some hymns now. What she did was, it was her form of kind of spiritual journaling. So brilliant. This is the way she expressed her experiences of God being at work, the way she processed the doctrine that she had through reading the Bible, and she composed these hymns, or poems as they are, and didn't write them down. She shared them with her friends in the local Sayat.
Verbally, you mean?
Verbally, yeah.
Okay.
And her maid in Dolwarfach, her maid, who was also a Christian and who married a Methodist minister, she remembered these verses, these stanzas, and then she was the one who passed them on to her husband, who wrote them down, and that's why we still have her work. I think
Remarkable.
It's about 70 stanzas of poetry, and these have then been edited to be, I think, around 30 hymns that we still have today. So she wouldn't have thought that she had a ministry. She was just processing what God did in her life, and how she responded to what she heard in the gospel. And out of her personal worship, then Beautiful. We've got this gift of something that's been used for centuries and still is being used by Christians who love God and who worship Jesus today, which is remarkable, isn't it?
Remarkable, yeah. So what sort of impact did her ministry have? Wales, even beyond, I don't know, but certainly in Wales, what sort of impact did her ministry have with regard
Well,
to the gospel?
interestingly enough, during her lifetime, her impact would have been contained to those closest to her in the Sayat.
Okay.
So she would have shared her hymns with those in the Sayat with her family, closest family, and her maid. But it would have stayed there. And she wrote letters as well. And her letters were a bit more public than her hymns. Her hymns were very personal because when she spoke to her maid and her maid said, "Can we write these down?" Anne said, "No, I don't. These aren't for other people. These
This is
for
my
me.
hat. Yeah, this is
It's
my
my hat." But her letters are a bit more public, and we've still got her letters, personal letters, to be able to realize what she was thinking, how she responded to stuff. But her letters are examples of how she'd contribute verbally in the Sayat. So it's, "Oh, I've been thinking about this. This element of the incarnation has really moved me today." So it was contained until after her death. And this is where we see the remarkable connections that she had with, for example, people like Thomas Charles. I know we've done a video with Jonathan Thomas about Thomas Charles. Thomas Charles would have had an impact because one of his teachers in his circulating schools, John Hughes Pont Roberts, was the spiritual counsellor for Ann Griffiths. And then after she died, John Hughes wrote down her poetry, and they were published as hymns through the work of Thomas Charles. And then they had a wider audience. But even then, during the few years after her death, she wouldn't have been a big name in Wales. So the spiritual or the impact of her ministry would have been contained until after she died. Her poetry was then published through the work of Thomas Charles and John Hughes, spiritual counsellor. But she didn't have a published biography of her life until the 1840s.
Okay.
And of course, because all her work were done through the medium of the Welsh language, it was contained locally and then more widely, especially at the end of the 19th century on to the 20th century. They'd have been included in various collections of hymn books in Welsh. Okay. So congregations up and down Wales would have sung her poetry. So she'd be very well known in Wales through Welsh Christians. But I think internationally, she wouldn't be well known, although in the middle of the 20th century, her work was translated. And one of the biggest or the best resources that we've got now is there's a website from a research project done by Cardiff University, the Ann Griffiths website, where you can get all her hymns, all her letters in Welsh and in English. And I'd say that's your one-stop shop for Ann Griffiths. Go and have a look at the Ann Griffiths website. It's a wonderful resource to see who she was and what her contribution was to Christianity in Wales.
You should have left that till the end, Rhodri, because people might go there now.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Anyway.
but to give you a quote, one of the leading authorities on spirituality said that Ann Griffiths' hymns was one of the best guarded secrets of the island of Britain.
Wow.
And that she wrote some of the greatest Christian poetry in Europe during her time.
Gosh, what a remarkable, such a short period as well. And from the back of beyond, nobody's heard of. But anyway, there's so many lessons in this. Okay. Rhodri, I love listening to the way that you bring this person, Ann Griffiths, alive, really. That's the term used. You've taken us into her world of what she was like. So let's bring her to today, okay? And what can we learn as individuals, Christians who are following Jesus, who love Jesus? What can we as individuals learn from her life today and sort of, the lessons? Because we don't want to leave this legacy. There's a great legacy of hymns, okay, but we don't want to leave the legacy in history as to what we can learn from her.
I think one of the things that I've always thought when reading Ann's work and what's been written about her is the value of godly fellowship that she enjoyed in the Sayat. She was a product of that Sayat, where she would gain insights from other Christians. She would learn through others' spiritual experiences, and she understood the Bible, processed the Bible, had accountability, had prayer, and shared this longing for God to be exalted and God to be at work, not only in her local area, but throughout the world, with a tight group of other-minded, similarly minded Christians. And I think as we become a more individualistic society, I think the value of that godly fellowship, where you can see people online, as we're doing this online, is brilliant, but it shouldn't take away from knowing other Christians, loving other Christians and growing with them, and realizing that through even very unremarkable circumstances like Anne was brought up in, God could do something remarkable, because that's what he does.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking of Anne, she didn't go to university. She didn't have a great deal of opportunities in a worldly sense. But again, the Lord used her. And it reminds me of, that part of Acts chapter 4, where Jesus' disciples is before the council of Jewish leaders.
Yeah.
And they say, these people, they're uneducated, they're common, but they've been with Jesus.
Beautiful.
There's something special about them. And I think that's what you see when you read Anne's work. Her view of Jesus as God, as man, as truly God and truly man, her love towards what Jesus did for her, and her inability to stop praising him is such an inspiration for us, even though she came from, well, in worldly terms, from nowhere.
Humble background.
Very humble background.
Yeah. I'm just aware that possibly we are familiar with that term Sayat, okay? But for somebody who this is the first time they've come across that term Sayat, just very, very briefly, in a sentence, no more than a paragraph, explain what a Sayat is. Can you, Rhodri?
Well, the word Sayat comes from the English society, so it's a religious society. It's similar to a house group where Christians met together, shared Christian experiences, understood the Bible, prayed together, and grew together as Christians.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Anything else that we can learn from her life as individuals now? Because I also want to look at what we can learn as a church, as a body, the wider body in Wales. But before we leave the sort of the individual stuff, anything else we can learn?
I think there's an element of using whatever God has given you, use those gifts, use the time that God has given you for his glory. It doesn't matter if it's very short. It doesn't matter if you think this is just me, it's nothing special.
Wow, powerful that. Powerful.
And have that desire to know Jesus more intimately. That's what Anne had. Throughout her work, you see that longing to see Jesus, to worship him, and to grow closer to him throughout her life. And I think that's always something that inspires. And it's a good example and especially if you think that she was struggling with ill health. She had that desire to know Christ and to know with him she'd be safe. And she would be able to glorify him and worship him for eternity. And that never left her. And I think that's something that we tend, in our busy lives, we tend to be tempted to kind of fit Jesus in somewhere, rather than making him the object of our faith, of our love, of our hope.
Excellent. Excellent. Have you got anything for us with regard to how the wider body of Christ in Wales can benefit, can learn from her life? Anything?
Well, I'd obviously say don't avoid church history. I would say that anyway. But there's something really special about tapping into what God has done in our country centuries before us, and that there's something special about worshipping using the words of people who have gone before us. They might be a bit harder to understand at times, but there's a massive blessing for us to be able to tap into the passion that our forefathers had for the gospel, for knowing Jesus. And I'd also say not to be dismissive of rich biblical doctrine, because that was the building blocks through the Spirit's work that inspired Anne's meditations and poetry. She lapped up what she heard in the Seats through sermons, and that then flowed into her worship. And good biblical teaching should always move us to worship, and I think that's important today as well. We shouldn't go for the lowest common denominator. We should make sure that what we think and what we proclaim of the gospel is understandable, of course, but we shouldn't veer away from rich biblical doctrine. And I think Anne, who didn't perhaps have the benefits of education that we have, she was able, through the Spirit's work, to use that to be built up through those wonderful preachers of her time. And we've got a responsibility as a church to do the same for our generation.
Amen. Amen. There was a depth to her, wasn't there? A spiritual depth to her. And she, by revelation, as you say, from the Spirit, there was a depth to her that she then put into words. And like we've said, it's a legacy, that's a rich legacy that we've been left. So amazing. Rhodri, is there anything, as we bring this to a close now, is there anything that you feel is important for the listener to know about with regard to Ann Griffiths that I haven't asked you, or that you've not had the opportunity yet? Is there anything that really sticks out, or have we covered everything, do you think? Just have a think.
Oh, there's so much more to say about Ann Griffiths.
Possibly I shouldn't have asked you that question then. No, go on. Seriously.
I would encourage anyone who's interested to go on the Ann Griffiths website, have a look for yourself, have a read through what she's composed, and imagine what her life was like, especially thinking that she died at such a young age, and be inspired by realizing it's the same gospel, it's the same Redeemer, it's the same God who's still at work in Wales or wherever you are today, and let that be an inspiration for you. Let that breed a longing in you to be able to see a bit more of Jesus, exactly as Anne wanted to convey that she wanted to see more of Jesus, love him more, and be used by him through her life. And I could finish by reading some of her verses.
In Welsh?
I've got the translation.
Great. Go on,
so this is again, this has come from the Ann Griffiths website.
Okay.
So the verses in Welsh is O am gael ffydd I edrych. In English it says, O might I gain faith's insight with angels' minds on high, into heaven's secret counsels, its saving mystery. Two natures in one person, joined indivisibly, true, pure, and unconfounded, perfect in unity. Behold him, all sufficient, my soul thy need to fill. Take heart, and cast upon him the weight of every ill. True man, in all thy weakness he truly feels for thee. True God, over world, flesh, Satan, he reigns victoriously.
Absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. Rhodri, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much, Rhodri. Yeah, and I feel a sense that there's another one coming up. with this. And so thank you very much indeed for this one. And we'll get you back to
thank you, Gwyneth.
Yeah, to share about somebody else as well, because you really brought Ann Griffiths alive and made her relevant to today. So thanks very much, Rhodri. Okay,
thank you.
Bless you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.